When I started the new South African Netflix series Unseen, I apparently missed some of the titles on the screen because as the first episode was going along, every single part of the story and the actions felt very familiar. And it makes sense because Unseen is actually a remake of the Turkish Netflix series Fatma. So is this one worth diving into? On a mission to uncover her missing husband's whereabouts, a quiet house cleaner goes down a dangerous and destructive path littered with sinister characters who want to exploit her for their nefarious schemes. So, if you've seen Fatma, there are some very obvious differences between that show and Unseen, like the locations and the sets. And while a lot of the scenarios do take place in similar locations, some key points are changed to match the landscape of South Africa. And it's also one episode shorter than the original series. We follow Zinzi, a cleaner who basically walks through her life not being noticed by those around her, which is where the title of Unseen comes from. She's an unseen entity that she exploits for the purposes of this story. Her husband is missing, and as she tries to find out where he might be, the people he was intertwined with were dangerous and mixed up in very bad things, so the environments that she enters aren't always the safest. The acting is wonderful, especially from the lead actress, Gail Mabelaine. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Well, she's quiet and almost mousy, and she's also extremely brutal when she's pushed. Now, as Zenzi, she elicits a lot of sympathy because almost all of those around her treat her as a throwaway. And I love how Zinzi can be invisible when she needs to be, allowing her non-demonstrative persona to really allow her to blend in. Like in one scene, she literally walks right past cops doing this massive search inside a very small location, and then she also walks past a group of people after dealing with one of her antagonists. So there are two types of story elements at play within the series. One is the mystery that Zinzi is trying to solve. Her husband's missing, and no matter where she turns, nobody seems to have any answers, even though some others are actually searching for him too. Now, the other story aspect is that of a thriller, where the tension and the anxiety of Zinzi's situations, they can make your heartbeat creep up. And it's established very early on that her husband dealt with a ton of bad people. So when Zinzi enters that world looking for her husband, she's now thrust into the world and all of those characters too. Unwittingly, she's just getting herself into situations that cause massive ripples and then also compound on each other to make one bout encounter into a series of unfortunate events. Now, something that this series does that's very different from Fatma is that this show doesn't give us a teaser trailer type of intro for each episode. Now, those tended to spoil certain events that would be coming up, so I really appreciate that Unseen, it doesn't include them. We dive right into the story, a lot of the time picking up pretty close to where we left off in the previous episode. Now, this helped to make the binging more accessible and easy, even though the story content was already doing that. Now, all along the series, we meet new bad guys, and there are a few that I just wish we got more development on. We can get the gist that they're either powerful or nasty individuals, but when we have very little actual context on them, they don't seem as threatening or even consequential to the story as they could be. There's one character who is mainly background, but we do meet them one time. Now, they're supposed to be very menacing and someone that everybody is fearful of, but they're a stranger to us, so there's no menace whatsoever that's conveyed. And this happens a few times with some other antagonists. I mean, not quite to the dismissive degree as that one character that I was just talking about, but several of the baddies, they're just kind of meh. But with that said, there are two or three that really do deserve the ire they stir up. We get a ton of insight into them and their behaviors, and that made me hope for a nasty end to them. Really, and that's how I think a lot of the villains actually should be, especially if they're supposed to come across as threatening. In this case, the few that we do know intimately, they're dangerous and treacherous, and not anybody that we would mourn should Zinzi decide to end them. Because this is only 6 episodes, the story is both efficient, but also thinner in spots. Now, moments that were shown in Fatma to a greater degree, they're trimmed down here, leaving interactions a little less effective. Now, take Zinzi's relationship with her sister, for example. We can tell that there's tension between the two, and that they lead drastically different lives. But the sister only pops in and out of the story here and there, never feeling like she's fully fleshed out and an integral part of the narrative. Now, I didn't mind her inclusion at all, especially because it does show how very different they are in ideals, behaviors, and lifestyles. But I think to have more of an emotional impact, especially as the story nears the conclusion, it would be great to have her included more in some of the key conversations, either to draw the sisters together or wedge them farther apart. And there's a lot of great suspense that builds, especially as the world closes in around Zinzi. She's being approached from multiple angles, and the presentation does a good job of ratcheting up the stress for an exciting climax. Now, the ending of Unseen is slightly different than it is with Fatma. The location, obviously, it's going to be different, but that's really inconsequential for the actions. The series concludes with a slight unknown feeling. I mean, we can be 99% sure of what happens when the screen goes black, but in Fatma, there's zero doubt as to the outcome of the series. Now, I'm not sure I like either conclusion better than the other. They're just slightly different to possibly produce different emotional outcomes. So, overall, Unseen is an engaging and suspenseful mystery thriller. Gail Mabelaine deftly creates a character that's believable by crafting a persona that can disappear into her surroundings in the middle of an investigation. The story maintains a good level of intrigue as the main character performs her search, and that's made even more compelling through the obstacles and complications she encounters along the way, leading to some exciting and brutal altercations. And while I'm not sure we really needed a duplicate series, especially one that's only a couple of years old, it is interesting to see how different cultures approach the same story and premise, still creating emotional connections and devastating outcomes, illustrating that a good story has universal appeal. There's not really any sex, but there are sexual situations, no nudity, a ton of profanity, and a lot of violence. I give Unseen 3.5 out of 5 couches. So what are you watching right now? Anything good that you can recommend to me? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.